it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
Welcome to Part 4 of our series called Jazz from its Origins to the Present. In Part 4, we'll be talking about jazz of the 30s, known as the swing era. Because of the worldwide depression in the 30s, many of the record companies had gone out of business. Many bands couldn't find work, and there was also a shortage of dances. People decided to stay home and listen to the radio rather than going out and listening to live music. Bennie Goodman was one of the most famous musicians of this style of early jazz, and in fact he was a sideman for many groups. He started a radio program called Let's Dance that became very popular for people to listen to while they were at home. Bennie Goodman traveled all over the country, and when he was on the West Coast, he actually created a big stir with a new type of music that he called swing. This new type of swing music lasted well into the 1940s and was played all over the country. These big bands were known as swing bands, and they played in movie theaters, in clubs, and at college universities. This type of music became so popular that a lot of the fans of these various groups would request certain songs, and they would gather around the bandstand in order to listen more closely to their favorite groups. The leaders of the groups became stars in their own right. The white musicians included Bennie Goodman, Artie Shaw, and the Dorsey brothers. The black groups were led by people such as Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Count Basie, and Jimmy Lunceford. Some of the previously flourishing groups, like Fletcher Henderson's, were now being swallowed up by this new swing era and actually disappeared. Even though Fletcher Henderson's own group had folded, he became one of the best arrangers of the swing era, and in fact Bennie Goodman started to insist that he have certain swing arrangements that would allow for ample improvisation over the arrangement. At the height of the swing era, the band size started to become standardized, which allowed the arrangers to write for many different groups. The bass lines and the drum parts were starting to be rewritten in the swing era. The bass lines were now a walking bass line, where they would go up and down scale passages, and the drum sets were now including instruments like the hi-hat, floor toms, and floor cymbals. These new cymbals would often keep the time on 2 and 4. This new drum pattern allowed the arrangers to create much more of a swing feel. Even though Fletcher Henderson was not actively leading his own band, many of his former band members were out there leading their own groups. One of these was Earl Hines. Jimmy Lunceford was another consummate performer. He actually graduated from Fisk University, and after graduation he got together with some of his old classmates and professors, and they formed their own group. By 1933, Jimmy Lunceford was performing all around New York City and created some memorable tunes with many different innovations. Some of the most famous tunes that Jimmy Lunceford recorded include songs like Down by the Old Mill Stream, Easter Parade, and Ain't She Sweet. Let's listen to one of Jimmy Lunceford's tunes called For Dancers Only. The next artist that we'll talk about is Cab Calloway. He was one of the black musicians that was known all around the country and particularly played at the Cotton Club. He was famous for some of his songs like Minnie the Moocher, which featured choruses like Heidi, Heidi, Ho.
Hey folks, here's a story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a low-down hoochie-coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail, but Minnie had a heart as big as a whale. Heidi, 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 Heidi. Heidi, 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 Heidi. Hody, 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 ho. Heedy, 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 heedy. Heidi, 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 ho.
Even though there is a lot of emphasis on the bands from the East Coast, particularly from New York City, the Midwest also featured many popular bands of this time period. Kansas City was home to many of what were called territory bands. Often the music around the city would go from dusk until dawn, and they would play in all sorts of different clubs, boogie-woogie style and big band music. One of the people that was in this Kansas City area was Mary Lou Williams, and she started using the tenor saxophone as a soloist instead of the alto saxophonist. One of the most powerful figures in the Kansas City area was Bennie Moten. He recorded styles and were reminiscent of the ragtime era, that were very similar to what King Oliver had produced in years before. Let's listen to Moten's Swing. Like so many other jazz musicians, Benny Goodman had a title. He was known as the King of Swing, and his clarinet playing became the standard for most bands. After being on the West Coast for a while, Benny Goodman's band headed back to New York City, where he started to record almost every month. Benny Goodman had all sorts of other small groups, including some trios and quartets, besides his big band. He also broke down the color barrier and started to hire some black musicians to play with his groups. Another major contribution was his first concert in Carnegie Hall. Benny Goodman's landmark performance in Carnegie Hall featured one of his most well-known numbers. It was his theme song, Sing, Sing, Sing. Count Basie was a central figure in jazz for almost 50 years. He was the leader of the swing era who really emphasized the use of the blues. Although Count Basie was a latecomer to the New York scene, he was very influential and included in his band some great virtuoso soloists who had performed together in many other groups. Count Basie regularly recorded for Decca Records, made it through World War II, and kept the band swingin'. Let's hear one of his arrangements called Jumpin' at the Woodside. Tatum was a child prodigy, virtuoso pianist who played stunning improvisations. Let's hear his composition, Three Little Words. Another virtuoso on guitar was Belgian-born gypsy Django Reinhardt. Let's hear his composition, Shine.
Baby, that's why they call me Shine.
Django Reinhardt actually performed regularly with musicians from the United States that went to Europe to perform. One of the musicians who actually played in Europe to develop his style before coming back to this country was Coleman Hawkins. He recorded one of his most famous compositions, Body and Soul. Lester Young was a tenor saxophonist star of the Count Basie band, and he actually did some of his first recordings with Count Basie. One of those was Oh Lady Be Good. One of Lester Young's peers was Billie Holiday. She was a well-known singer of this time, and we're going to end our session today with a piece that she made famous called God Bless the Child.
Them that's got shall get, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible said, and it still is news. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
Thank you for joining us on part 4 of our series that talked about the 30s and swing. Join us next time for more of jazz from its origins to the present.